By 2026, the Japanese archipelago sits at the geopolitical epicenter of the contest between the United States and China. Tokyo's security apparatus is driven by an overriding anxiety, a military contingency in the Taiwan Strait. For Japanese strategists, the timeline for that conflict is not determined by abstract geopolitical theory. It is dictated by the biological clock of Chinese President Xi Jinping. This timeline visualizes the threat. In 2026, Xi is 73. Assuming peak operational viability until 85, that leaves a finite 12-year window stretching to 2038 to absorb Taiwan. The closer the clock gets to 2038, the higher the probability of military action. For Japan, the CCP's biological reality imposes a ticking countdown. It sets a hard, unyielding deadline for national survival. This is the deadline facing Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Her administration is tasked with constructing a new deterrence architecture before that window closes. That architecture requires 3 pillars: rewriting the legal parameters of war, enacting a policy of defense Keynesianism, and managing the U.S. alliance. Executing these shifts requires an immense reserve of domestic political capital. While Takaichi shares the defense goals of her late colleague Shinzo Abe, she must build her own political capital independently to execute them. Japan's grand strategy rests on a paradox. To project the strength necessary to survive a foreign threat over the next 12 years, Takaichi must first navigate a fragile domestic political landscape. To understand Japan's preparation, we have to examine its legal restraints. Under its constitution, Japan cannot legally commit to fighting a war to defend Taiwan itself. Instead, Tokyo relies on a specific mechanism, the survival-threatening situation. This operational map shows the sequence. If Chinese assets move on Taiwan and American forces mobilize to intercept, Japan's military options only activate if United States forces are already involved in the conflict. Once American troops are under fire, the 2015 security legislation triggers. This allows the Japanese self-defense forces to integrate with the U.S. military as a single operational unit. Japan's involvement is technically a defense of American forces, not a defense of Taiwan. That legal distinction dictates exactly how Tokyo must signal its posture to Beijing. Because Japan's legal trigger depends on the presence of U.S. forces, maintaining the alliance is critical, especially when navigating a transactional administration in Washington. Tokyo manages that relationship using its geographic leverage. This map shows the distribution of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, heavily concentrated on the Japanese archipelago. If you remove those bases, a massive vacuum of power opens across the Western Pacific. Without the ability to launch from Japanese territory, the United States loses its status as a residential military power in the Indo-Pacific. The scale of this forward deployment on Japanese soil provides the physical mass required to signal deterrence in the region's most contested waters. Japan is not just a partner to the U.S., it is the geographic prerequisite for American presence in the region. Internally, Takaichi is pushing an economic strategy to support this military posture, an approach termed defense Keynesianism. This policy seeks to drive economic growth by integrating civilian sectors into the defense industrial base, drawing direct pipelines from academia, AI, and outer space research into military manufacturing. But this modernization push has a severe vulnerability at its center. Japan has no sovereign equivalent to the CIA, the NSA, or MI6. Its military strategy currently operates without its own dedicated intelligence community. To fix this, Takaichi is attempting to legislate a bill that will build an intelligence-gathering agency from scratch. Military hardware holds little value if the state lacks the institutional intelligence to deploy it effectively. Ultimately, Tokyo's grand military strategy eventually crashes into the arithmetic of domestic politics. Takaichi's ultimate goal is to revise Article 9 of the Constitution, which would clear away the legal hurdles holding back the military. A constitutional revision requires a 2/3 majority in both houses. The current ruling coalition is running on a slim minority presence, well below that line. Meanwhile, opposition parties recently merged to form a unified centrist bloc, deepening the political fault lines and turning every legislative vote into a battle for political capital. This gridlock is fueled by a generational divide. Takaichi's platform is highly popular among voters in their 20s and 40s, while the opposition relies heavily on a massive bloc of senior citizens. The legislative effort to modernize Japan's defense posture is currently constrained by the political influence of its largest and most cautious voting demographic. While Tokyo prepares for a potential contingency, it cannot simply decouple from its largest trading partner. The Japanese government executes a policy of strategic patience. They maintain their corporate presence inside China, while they are quietly working to diversify the supply chains of critical minerals. Maintaining that economic presence leaves Japanese expatriates operating in a highly precarious environment. The Chinese Communist Party operates a sophisticated human tracing apparatus. Every foreign worker functions under a pervasive surveillance state. To mitigate risks like hostage diplomacy, Tokyo is actively encouraging its corporations to stop sending children and family members to live in China. Japan must execute a high-wire act, treating China as an active security threat while preserving the supply chains that keep the Japanese economy functioning. Faced with intense pressure from Beijing and the volatility of domestic politics, Tokyo is working to globalize its security architecture. Under agreements like the Hiroshima Accord, Japan is pulling European military power directly into the Indo-Pacific. When British carrier strike groups operate near Japan, they do so with the expectation of operational cover from the Japanese self-defense forces. Japan sits on the periphery of a Eurasian landmass dominated by nuclear-armed authoritarian regimes. It is now racing against a very short deadline. The biological clock in Beijing continues to tick down toward 2038. Japan's success in this 12-year window requires aligning external security goals with its internal political realities. The effectiveness of its role in a Taiwan contingency will depend on the legislation passed within the halls of the Diet.